Have you ever stopped to wonder why you learned the specific things you did in school? We all kind of assume that education is just neutral, a set of facts. But what if it's not? We're going to follow the journey of one teacher who started to question everything, and in doing so, uncovered the hidden forces that really shape what we all learn.
Seriously, think about your own school days for a second. Your history class, your English class. Did you get the whole story, or did you get one particular version of it? Well, that's the exact question that started this one teacher down a rabbit hole, deconstructing everything he thought he knew. And his journey begins with something he calls the unseen curriculum. It all started with this one simple realization. There were these invisible forces, these powerful influences shaping his lesson plans from the outside. And once he saw it, he couldn't unsee it. He was seeing the unseen curriculum in action.
And this is the big idea right here. What's taught in schools is never, ever neutral. Every single choice, which historical events to focus on, which books make the reading list, which scientific theories get the spotlight, it's all a choice. And those choices, they always reflect a specific set of values, a specific idea of what's important. For this teacher, reading this quote from the academic Michael Apple was like a light bulb going off. It completely reframed how he saw his job. The curriculum wasn't just a list of subjects anymore. No, it was a battlefield, a place where different groups are constantly fighting to have their story, their knowledge be seen as the official one. Okay, so if the curriculum isn't neutral, that begs the question, who's actually in charge? Who holds the power? Well, as he discovered, the answer is often found way outside the classroom, with some really powerful forces pulling the strings. And this idea, also from Apple, gave our teacher, a guy named Reid, a name for the pressure he was feeling every day. This idea of neoliberal and neoconservative coalitions turning education into a market-driven system? Suddenly, it all clicked. That relentless focus on standardized testing, on hitting specific metrics, it wasn't just about making sure kids were learning. It was about turning schools into businesses, and a lot of the time, that came at the cost of actual critical thinking.
So what do you do when you realize that? Well, faced with all this pressure, he made a choice. He remembered what he learned in university about decolonization, and he decided to push back. He started to intentionally bring Indigenous and other marginalized voices into his classroom, voices that the standard curriculum so often leaves out. But changing things in his own little corner of the world was one thing. He still felt this huge disconnect with the school system he worked for. He'd hear all these promises about change, but then nothing would actually happen. And that led him to another really powerful concept, the performance of anti-racism. So this idea comes from a theorist named Sara Ahmed, and she calls it the non-performativity of anti-racism. It sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. Think of it like this. An institution gets called out, so they release a big, shiny statement about how committed they are to diversity. But the statement itself becomes the end goal. The words are treated as the action, and nothing fundamentally changes. The broken systems just keep on running. And that is why so many of these grand promises from big institutions just feel hollow. For our teacher, this theory was another light bulb moment. It finally gave him the words to describe that frustrating gap he was seeing every day. The gap between what his school board said about equity and what it actually did.
So let's ground this in reality for a second. We're going to look at what was happening at this teacher's own employer, the Peel District School Board, because it's a perfect, real-world example of this exact dynamic. 27. Just let that number sink in for a second. After a really damning report on anti-Black racism, the provincial government handed this school board 27 mandatory equity directives. On paper, that looks like a huge commitment to change, right?
But here's the contradiction. Here's the rhetoric versus the reality. On one side, you have the promise, 27 directives, government oversight, the whole deal. And on the other side, the reality for educators on the ground, a feeling that almost nothing was actually changing. The promise had become the performance. This was non-performativity playing out in real life.
So this entire journey, from digging into curriculum theory to seeing how institutions fail to act, it didn't really end with any easy answers. Instead, it left him with even deeper, more urgent questions. And that brings us to the first massive question. How do we get institutions to move beyond just saying the right things? How do we push past the performance and get to the real, hard work of actually challenging systemic discrimination? And that leads to our final question.
And really, this one isn't just for the educators. It's for parents, for students, it's for all of us. When the system itself is pushing back, how do we as individuals find the strength and the strategy to actually change what we teach and whose stories get told? It really makes you wonder, who's going to hold the pen for the next chapter of our education?